I've lurked here for a long time, mostly reading and moving on, saving the heavier posts for nights when the house is quiet and the dishwasher hums like white noise. Oddly enough, the person who nudged me to finally write is my wife. She worries that because I don't talk about what happened the way she does, out loud, in full color, I must be swallowing poison. I don't feel poisoned. I'm not hollow. I'm a man who burned his hand on a stove once and learned exactly how close to get to the flame. I keep certain pieces of myself tucked away where they can't be knocked over. That's how I stay steady. Before anything else, I want to say this plainly. The woman in my house today is not the woman you're about to meet in the first half of this story. She has iron in her spine now, and gentleness that isn't cheap. She's built a good life with me. She is a fierce mother, a wrecking ball to her own old excuses, and the first person to show up for a neighbor. I'm not writing to make her a villain or to convince anyone to reconcile. I'm writing because the way we broke and rebuilt says something about pain, about choice, about how two people can look at the same wreckage and decide to build a different kind of house. We married too young and too sure of ourselves, 21, with more plans than money. Our son, Jonah, was born 2 years later. By then, I'd gone back to finish my degree because I thought a diploma could sand down every rough edge in our life. My schedule in the fall of 2001 looked like this: unload trucks at a distribution center from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., shower in the employee locker room, drive across town to a city records job from 9 to 5, and then classes Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6 to 9:45. Saturdays were for labs. Elise, my wife, worked 7 to 3 as a patient care tech at a community hospital. My mother watched Jonah most days. All of it was within a 15-minute radius. I used to say we lived inside a circle you could draw with a coffee cup. What I didn't count on was that ambition feels like neglect when you're the one not holding it. My wife had been saying for months that I didn't see her. She said it in small ways at first, dropping her voice when I came in late, letting silence swell on the couch between us. Then in sharper ways, annoyed that I studied on weekends, frustrated that we hadn't had sex in a while. We were both tired and 23 and arrogant about how much a marriage can absorb. The night everything cracked was a Monday in May, finals week. I was at the kitchen table with note cards spread like a picket fence, making sure my citations were bulletproof. Elise hovered, wiping a clean counter, then wiping it again. I asked her to sit. She didn't. When I asked what was wrong, she said nothing, with the exact tone that means everything. I told her I couldn't be dragged into a fight. She said I was already in one. It went like that for an hour. Two people throwing their loneliness back and forth like it was the other one's fault to fix. Somewhere in there, I said something that didn't deserve to be said. Stop acting like a teenager, Elise. I wasn't shouting. If I'd shouted, maybe she would have shouted back, and we'd have pushed this fight into tomorrow like we did all the others. Instead, she stared at me, the way you stare at a stranger who says your name, and she said, very evenly, "I hate you right now. I'm in love with someone else." I didn't jump up. I didn't pound my fists on the table. I sat there and tried to make those words find a hook in my mind to hang on. My head felt like it filled with helium, and I was the one floating, watching the scene from above. When I asked who, the answer came like it had already been said 100 times in her head: a maintenance tech named Travis. Not a doctor, not a nurse, someone who fixed the things that broke, who showed up with a tool bag and small talk and a grin. He complimented her. He got her. They ate lunch together. They sat in his truck during breaks and shared complaints like cigarettes. For a couple of weeks there had been kisses, the kind that sound soft when you use that word, but aren't soft at all when they smash the bones of trust. That day at lunch, she said, they went further. They made out in the cab of his truck. His hand was in her underwear and her hand was on him, and it wasn't awkward or fumbling, but practice the way people get when they convince themselves they've discovered something rare instead of something common and sad. I think I asked what she planned to do, but I'm not sure. I know I stood up and walked to our bedroom. I packed a suitcase. She followed me, talking, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, asking where I thought I was going, throwing a jab about running home to my mother. I carried the suitcase out, set it by the front step, came back in, and took her purse from the hook by the door. I told her she needed to leave. She said she wouldn't. I picked her up, not violently, not to hurt her. I lifted her the way you lift a kid who refuses to get off the floor of the grocery store. I set her on the hood of her car. She was so surprised she didn't move for a second. That was enough time for me to get inside and lock the deadbolt. She pounded the door once, twice, then drove away. I turned the porch light off and sat on the living room floor with my back against the door until the house felt empty. I called into both jobs the next morning and said there was a family emergency. I slept for 2 hours. Then I made a list. Drop Jonah at my mother's. Call my family's attorney. Change the locks. Close the joint accounts. Make copies of the bills. Take half the money and set it aside for Elise so no one could say I cleaned her out. Cancel the credit card. Get a cheap prepaid phone because I didn't trust our landline to stay civil. When you don't know what to do with the inside of your chest, sometimes your hands need tasks. By 10 a.m., I was in our lawyer's office, a man who had eaten potlucks at my parents' table since I was a kid. He suggested I breathe for a week. I told him I could breathe after papers were filed. He said he'd have them ready by early afternoon. At noon, I was waiting at the locksmith. By 2, I'd closed the accounts. I left an envelope with Elise's sister at the pharmacy where she worked. Half the money divided down to the dollar and a note that said, "Tell Elise to go through you for anything she needs." I don't want contact. I drove home and put new locks on the doors with my hands shaking only when I had to line up the screws. Elise didn't call that day. She didn't come to the house. I learned later she spent the day in a studio apartment behind a body shop that Travis and a friend rented cash. She described it in a notebook years later. The smell of oil and old carpet, a sagging love seat, a milk crate turned into a nightstand with a lamp that buzzed when you turned it on. That afternoon, they had sex on a mattress on the floor. She wrote about feeling lit up and then hollow, and then angry at me for making her feel hollow. That's the loop she lived in for a while. What she wanted felt good. Afterward felt bad. Bad needed a target. Target rotated back to me. On Wednesday, I filed. I knew a process server who owed me a favor. I told him to serve her at the hospital after her lunch break because cruelty dressed up as efficiency still looks like cruelty if you stare at it too long. You should know this about me. The part of me that believes in fair fights went dark for a while. I went to work. I pretended to fill out forms while my insides paced. Elise ate lunch with Travis in the cab of his truck around 11. They didn't talk about me. They didn't talk about the future. They did what people do when they think the point of a forbidden thing is shock instead of consequence. At noon, she walked back onto her floor, and the woman who ran the unit raised a hand and said, "Catherine, someone's here to see you. Her name isn't Catherine, but you get the idea." The process server asked her to confirm her identity and then, out loud, because he thought saying things out loud is how you get official, said, "You're being served with divorce papers citing marital misconduct." Elise dropped straight down like someone had cut the strings that held her upright. It wasn't graceful. He reached to help her up and she swatted him away, then swatted at Travis when he came close, scratching his neck. I wasn't there. I know this scene because 2 different people told it to me later. The unit manager, who thought adults should keep their hands to themselves, and the process server, who thought I'd want a play-by-play. Elise was fired by 3, code of conduct, grounds, immediate termination. Travis was fired earlier that afternoon. The whole building knew, because hospitals function like small towns with ID badges. Elise drove to her parents' house without calling me. Her mother fed her outrage like candy. Her father closed his eyes when he breathed and didn't say much. At 5045 that evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and faced a woman who was enormously pregnant and steady like a fence post. "I'm Hannah," she said. I'm Travis's wife." I let her sit on the sofa. Jonah ate macaroni at the table and watched us. Hannah looked at him and said, "He's beautiful. I'm sorry." She told me about the studio apartment behind the body shop. She told me about the game. Travis had started with 2 friends in January tally marks on a legal pad for married women they could sleep with by spring. She told me she'd found the legal pad in Travis's truck that afternoon after he came home high and crying, and how he had admitted to 3 women already, and then, between sobs, said he'd beaten his buddy's score. She told me she was 34 weeks pregnant with their 4th child. She told me the other woman Travis had been with that week lived 2 houses down from them and that Hannah was going to tell her husband as soon as she left my porch. She asked me where Elise was, and I told her. She asked if she could go see her, not to fight, but to tell her the truth she should have known. I gave her the address. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because truth delivered by a stranger can land cleaner than truth delivered by a spouse. Maybe because I wanted Elise's story to collide with reality before the night was over. At Elise's parents' house, Hannah asked to speak to her alone on the porch. She told her who she was. She told her Travis was still married and that the apartment was a rented lie. She told her about the tally marks, about the neighbor down the block. She told her she had just watched me feed our son dinner without calling anyone to make it about me. Elise cried. Hannah slapped her once, open-handed, not to bruise but to puncture. "You're not trash," Hannah said. "Don't let a trash person make you treat yourself like you are." Then she left. Elise's father called me the next morning. He's a quiet man. He said, "I'm sorry, son." He didn't say for what. He didn't need to. He told me Elise had hardly spoken, had showered twice, and put on the same robe again. He said she was writing in a composition notebook like a teenager, head bent, pen scratching, as if the writing itself could make a door where there wasn't one. He asked me to come over. I said no. That was not me being cruel. That was me applying a tourniquet. The next few days were a kind of numb. I took my last final. I passed. My family made hamburgers in the backyard and didn't say her name. On Sunday, I waited at the park at 1 like I said I would. Elise didn't show. At 3:30, her father called to apologize. He sounded tired in his bones. He said she was not right, that he was afraid to go to sleep. I said he needed to get her help. I said he needed to get her help. I said our son would see her when I believed it was safe for him. It was the only time in my life when safe meant from her mind instead of her body. 2 weeks went by without a word. Then Elise asked me to meet at the park the following Saturday at 9. I told her to bring her father. I brought my mother. Elise looked like a sketch of herself. She wore no makeup. She smelled like basic soap instead of the perfume I always associate with her. She had lost weight the way grief steals it, in the cheeks, then the shoulders. She played with Jonah on the playground while I stood at a distance with my arms crossed like a guard. My mother talked to her father on the bench like neighbors discussing weather. We did the park for 4 consecutive weekends. I extended the time from 2 hours to 4. She didn't ask to take him alone. She didn't ask anything at all, which is what made me believe she finally felt the shape of what she'd done. Her mother hired a lawyer and filed for full custody. That lit something ugly in me. I filed for full custody on the grounds of demonstrated instability and willful misconduct. We met in a drab courtroom that smells like paper and old coffee. Elise sat between her parents, her hands folded. Her mother took the stand and blamed me with the enthusiasm of a person who prefers clean stories. I was probably cheating. I had assaulted Elise by lifting her out of the house. I had always been cold. Elise's lawyer asked me bland questions about employment, about my schedule, about my plan for Jonah. Then Elise asked the judge if she could say something. He told her to consult her lawyer. She said she didn't need to. She apologized to my parents first, in a voice that sounded like it could crack if anyone breathed too loud. She apologized to her father. She told the judge she had done every bit of harm that mattered, that no one had forced her to hurt her family. that she had been selfish and stupid, and then doubled down. She said she didn't want to put Jonah through a tug of war and would accept any visitation schedule I offered. She cried without wiping her face. I offered supervised 1-hour visits for 6 weeks, then every other weekend if those went well. The judge nodded like a man who has seen this dance before. Somewhere in there, Elise began dropping composition notebooks at my door. She didn't hand them to me. She left them on the mat, like a delivery. I read them on the nights Jonah fell asleep early. The first pages were word vomit, angry, circular, a chess match with herself that never finished. Then she began to organize memories by days, by hours. She wrote about the first time Travis told her she looked unnoticed and how good it felt to be noticed by someone who wasn't me. She wrote about the truck cab and the feeling of being electric. And then she wrote about sitting in her own car afterward and staring at the steering wheel like it might tell her what to do next. She wrote something too that made me laugh, despite myself months later when we were almost back on speaking terms. She had convinced herself at one point that because she never climaxed with him, she hadn't truly cheated. Her father had the misfortune of hearing that theory and telling her it didn't make her less guilty, just less satisfied. I don't tell you that to cut her down. I tell you because the things we grasp at when we're drowning can be ridiculous, and sometimes the ridiculous is what wakes us up. The writing helped her. It didn't help me. Not yet. I could read about the sex. I could even read about how she felt when she told me she loved someone else. The pages that knocked me backward were the ones where she listed the things she'd said about me to Travis, cheap versions of my real flaws, stretched thin over his sympathy. I made her repeat those out loud during what we started calling our meetings because I believed that humiliation was an honest currency. If this part of the story makes you hate me, I don't blame you. I became a person I don't like for a while. Hurt people say that like it absolves them. It doesn't. It just explains the shape of the damage. She asked to move back in 8 months after D-Day. I said no. She asked again a month later. I said I'd consider it under conditions that I genuinely thought would make her say no. She agreed before I finished listing them. She would sleep in the spare room. No physical contact of any kind. No casual brushes in the kitchen. No pats on the shoulder. No reaching for my hand while we watched Jonah play. If she touched me without asking, she would move out within the week. I would handle her banking. She could keep her checkbook, but I would disperse funds for rent on the room she now rented. In our house, gas, school tuition, and basics. Yes, that sounds like control. It was also born out of her peeling $300 out of our savings account the week before D-Day to give to Travis for car trouble. Her mother was not allowed inside my house until and unless I said otherwise. If I started dating someone, she would move out within 7 days without a fight. All prior visitation schedules for Jonah would automatically resume if she moved out. She moved in a Saturday afternoon with 2 boxes and her notebooks. Jonah hugged her and then asked if she was staying for dinner. She said yes with a voice that trembled at the end like a wire. I was at my worst those first months. I picked fights about crumbs. I made a joke once at her expense in front of my brother and watched her flinch and still smile like she deserved it. She did deserve consequences. She didn't deserve me weaponizing cheap laughs. I needed a way to keep the venom from leaching into the walls, so we invented Thursday Debrief. After Jonah fell asleep on Thursdays, we would sit on opposite ends of the couch and say the hard things we'd swallowed that week. We couldn't go to bed until the list was clear. No yelling, no swerving into the past unless the present required it, and if either of us declared a timeout, the other had to honor it. It sounds hokey typed out. It saved us from bleeding out on normal days. Disclosure part. There is one thing I did not tell her during those meetings until 6 months after she moved back in. This is where my stoicism, the way I keep certain things in a locked drawer, nearly cost me the key. The night she left, I set our finances out on the kitchen table with notes, the way a teacher leaves substitute instructions. I put Jonah to sleep, kissed his hair, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. I showered. I put on jeans and a clean shirt. I took my grandfather's 28 from the shoebox at the back of our closet. I sat on the edge of our bed and put the barrel in my mouth. The metal tasted exactly like it smells. Oily, chemical, wrong. I remember thinking that if I leaned forward just a hair, gravity might decide for me. I sat like that long enough for my jaw to ache. I unloaded the gun and put it back in the box. I took off my clean shirt and lay on the bed. I slept because my body shut itself off. When I finally told Elise that, I watched something break open in her, not out of pity, but because she could see the cliff's edge she'd pushed us both to without realizing it. That night, I let her sit on the floor with her back to my closed bedroom door for an hour while I worked up the courage to open it. When I did, she asked if she could come in, and I said no, and then asked if we could go to her room. We did. I sat in the chair. She sat on the bed. I sat in the chair. She sat on the bed. I said the words, "I forgive you," without meaning them yet, because I needed to know how they felt in my mouth. Sometimes your heart follows, late and skeptical. After that, we touched hands sometimes in the kitchen when our fingers collided at the drawer. Later, there were goodbye pecks at the door that didn't ask for more. Months later, there were long hugs that didn't turn into anything else. Then, almost a year after she moved back into the spare room, we had sex for the first time since the wreck. I'm not going to write details. I'll say this, it felt like hysteria and relief and anger and home all braided together. For a month, we were magnets. She had been keeping track by then, because that was part of her therapy counting, naming, witnessing. She told me later we made love 31 times in 27 days. That number doesn't make us brave. It makes us two bodies trying to stitch something invisible. In those months, Elise also did quieter work that mattered more than any debrief rule. She called the hospital's employee assistance program and found a therapist who specialized in trauma and compulsive behavior. She showed me receipts. She volunteered with a local women's shelter on Saturdays. She wrote apology letters she never sent to the people who could have taken her down to the police station if they'd wanted to. Her supervisors, the HR rep, even the janitorial crew chief who had to fire Travis. She read books that made her mad. Not at me, not at Travis, but at her own patterns. She cut off the handful of friends who had egged her on in the early days with eye rolls about all work and no play. She told her mother to stop bad-mouthing me or she would leave the house when it started. That last one, more than anything, told me she was building a spine. We didn't tell Jonah anything beyond, Mom and Dad are doing hard work. We didn't lie if he asked direct questions, we just answered the ones he asked. When he was little, that was enough. As he got older, he stopped asking, which I used to think meant he was fine. Now I know it can also mean kids are protecting you. Today is not the point of the story, but here it is because you'll wonder. It's been 22 years. We have 2 more children besides Jonah. They're grown. There are 2 grandkids who made me soft in ways I didn't know were left. Elise is semi-retired and picks up PRN shifts when she wants to feel useful in a way that ends at the end of the day. I still work full-time and learned how to take vacations that aren't just long weekends. We have fights like normal people. We also have weeks where Thursday debrief is nothing more than, "Are we good?" and a thumbs up. Triggers happen rarely now. One hit 3 years ago when a relative with a talent for loneliness told our oldest about his mother's affair in a way designed to cause maximum splash. Elise handled it with a steadiness I didn't have 20 years ago. She apologized to him without defending herself, told him what was his business and what was mine, and told him we would answer any question he had, but that our marriage is our marriage. He was quiet for a week, and then he was fine in the way adult children define fine. He still calls his mother on Sundays, still asks me for recipes when his wife is sick. I won't pretend that reconciliation makes you whole again in the same shape. I'm not the same man I was before the break. Some of the easy good in me burned off. I don't give every feeling a public room anymore. Elise doesn't ask me to be her emotional janitor. If she's struggling, she names it and brings a plan. I help execute plans. That sounds unromantic typed out. It's more intimate than the way we used to live. If you came here for a recommendation, I can't give you one. I don't believe there are templates for this. I believe in the serenity prayer work. The part that's yours, leave alone the part that isn't, and learn the difference the slow, humiliating way. If you reconcile, it needs to be because two people understand the cost and pay it in the currency of daily choices. If you leave, it needs to be because you refuse to set yourself on fire to keep a house warm that someone else keeps opening windows in. Either way, you get to win if you choose yourself without making yourself the only thing that matters. There's one more thing I keep in a locked drawer. We still have the composition notebooks. They live in a shoebox on the top shelf of the closet in the room that used to be our spare, and then, later, Jonah's room when he outgrew dinosaurs. Sometimes I stand on a chair and take the box down and put my hand on the covers without opening them. We've talked about burning them. We've also joked about donating them to some university archive under fake names so some grad student can write a thesis about the modern soul. We decided we'll burn them on our 50th anniversary. It's not about erasing. It's about acknowledging that some ghosts eventually learn to sleep. If you're in the middle of the bad days, I'm sorry. You don't have to be noble today. You don't have to forgive. You have to eat something and sleep a little and not put a gun in your mouth. You have to decide what you can live with and then act like your life matters. The rest is just a series of Thursdays where you say the thing and keep going. What do you think? Was reconciliation the right call here, or would you have walked? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like this hit home, tap like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps more than you know.